Before we begin, a word. Every voice you are about to hear could belong to a real person, and the next one could be yours. Play them apart and read it aloud at footnotes and folly.click. Welcome back. I am Pemberton, and this is Book 16, Part 4, the close of the book, and one of the bitterest passages in all of Josephus. It begins with a visitor, Eurycles, a Spartan of good family and rotten character, who works his way into the confidence of Herod, of Antipater, and of the doomed Alexander alike, and carries poison in every direction until the house is past saving. Abroad, the Arab minister Sylleus is at last unmasked and condemned before Caesar at Rome, and Caesar, reconciled to Herod, gives him a father's terrible permission to try his own sons, but counsels him to do it openly, before a great assembly gathered near the Roman city of Berytus. We will sit in that court. We will hear the one voice raised in mercy, an old soldier who forces his way to the king to beg for the young men's lives, and is destroyed for it. And we will follow Alexander and Aristobulus, the last sons of the Hasmonean line through their mother, to the place of their death at Sebaste. Let us finish Book 16.
At this time the confusion in Herod's family and among his children became far worse. It was now plain, as it had already been feared, that fortune was bringing the greatest and most unbearable disasters upon his kingdom. Trouble grew in the following way. A man named Eurycles, a Lacedemonian of some standing in his own country, but corrupt in character, came during his travels to Herod. He was crafty in pleasure-seeking and flattery, able to practice both while seeming to do neither. He brought Herod gifts, but managed to receive still more gifts from him in return. He chose the right moments to work his way into Herod's favor, until he became one of the king's closest friends. Eurycles stayed in Antipater's house, but he also gained easy access to Alexander and spoke freely with him. He claimed to be highly favored by Sylleus, king of Cappadocia, and on that basis he pretended to show great respect for Glaphyra. Secretly, he cultivated friendship with all of them, while carefully listening to everything said and watching everything done, so that he could gather slanders useful for pleasing each side. In short, he dealt with everyone, as though he were that person's special friend, and made each believe that his presence was for that person's advantage. In this way he won over Alexander, who was still young, and persuaded him that he could safely open his troubles to him, and to no one else. Alexander therefore told him of his grief, that his father had turned against him. He spoke also about his mother, and about Antipater, saying that Antipater had pushed them out of their proper honor, and had taken control of everything himself. None of this, Alexander said, could be endured, since his father had already come to hate them. He added that Herod would not admit them either to his table or to conversation with him. These were Alexander's natural complaints about the things that distressed him. Eurycles carried these conversations to Antipater, saying that he was not reporting them for his own sake, but because Antipater's kindness had overcome him, and the importance of the matter forced him to speak. He warned Antipater to beware of Alexander, because Alexander had spoken with violence, and, judging from his words, would certainly kill him with his own hand. Antipater believed that Eurycles was acting as his friend by giving this warning, and gave him gifts on every occasion. At last he persuaded him to tell Herod what he had heard. So Eurycles described to the king Alexander's hostile temper, as shown by the words he had heard him speak. Herod readily believed him. By these reports Eurycles brought the king to such a state, turning him with his words and provoking him, that Herod's hatred of Alexander grew fierce, and could not be softened. Herod showed this immediately by giving Eurycles a gift of 50 talents. After Eurycles had obtained this money, he went to Sylleus, king of Cappadocia. There he praised Alexander and claimed that he had helped him in many ways, especially by reconciling him with his father. He received money from Sylleus as well, and left before his destructive schemes were discovered. When Eurycles returned to Lacedemon, he still did not stop doing harm, and because of his many unjust acts he was banished from his own country. As for the king of the Jews, he no longer behaved toward Alexander and Aristobulus as he had before, when he had merely listened to slanders against them from others. He had now reached the point of hating them himself, and of urging men to speak against them even when they did not do so on their own. He watched everything that was said, asked questions, and listened to anyone who would speak, provided only that the person could say something against them. At last he heard that Berytus of Kos was a conspirator with Alexander. To Herod, this was the most welcome and pleasing news imaginable. Still greater misfortune fell upon the young men. The accusations against them were continually increased, and one might almost say that everyone seemed eager to lay some serious charge upon them, under the appearance of acting for the king's safety. There were 2 of Herod's bodyguards, Jucundus and Tyrannus, who were highly regarded for their strength and height. Herod had dismissed these men because he was displeased with them. They used to ride with Alexander, and because of their skill in exercises, they were greatly esteemed by him and had received gold and other gifts from him. The king immediately suspected these men and had them tortured. For a long time they endured the torture bravely, but at last they confessed that Alexander had tried to persuade them to kill Herod while he was hunting wild beasts. The plan, they said, was to make it appear that he had fallen from his horse and been pierced by his own spear, since such an accident had once happened to him before. They also showed where money was hidden underground in the stable. These men also convicted the king's chief hunter, saying that, at Alexander's command, he had given royal hunting spears and weapons to Alexander's followers. After this, the commander of the garrison of Alexandrium was arrested and tortured. He was accused of having promised to receive the young men into his fortress and to supply them with the king's money stored there. The commander himself admitted nothing. But his son came forward in a wretched way, said the accusation was true, and handed over a writing which, as far as could be judged, was in Alexander's hand. When by God's help we have finished everything we have planned to do, we will come to you. Do your best, as you promised, to receive us into your fortress. After this writing was produced, Herod no longer doubted that his sons had plotted treason against him. Alexander, however, said that Diophantus the scribe had imitated his handwriting, and that the paper had been maliciously drawn up by Antipater. Diophantus was known to be very clever at such practices, and when he was later convicted of forging other documents, he was put to death for it. The king then brought those who had been tortured before the crowd at Jericho, so that they could accuse the young men. Many of the people stoned these accusers to death. When they were also about to kill Alexander and Aristobulus, the king would not allow it, but restrained the crowd through Ptolemy and Pheroras. Still, the young men were placed under guard and held in custody, so that no one could reach them. Everything they did and said was watched. The disgrace and fear they lived under differed little, if at all, from that of condemned criminals. One of them, Aristobulus, was so deeply affected that he drew Salome, who was both his aunt and his mother-in-law, into grieving with him over his sufferings and into hating the man who had allowed things to come to this point. Are you not also in danger of destruction, when the report is going around that you revealed all our affairs beforehand to Sylleus, while you were hoping to marry him? Salome immediately carried these words to her brother. Herod lost patience and ordered Aristobulus to be bound. He also commanded that the two brothers, now kept apart from one another, write down the wrongs they had committed against their father and bring the writings to him. When this was required of them, they wrote that they had formed no treacherous designs, and had made no preparations against their father. They said only that they had intended to flee, because the distress they were in had made their lives uncertain and wearisome to them. About this time an ambassador came from Cappadocia, sent by Archelaus. His name was Melas, and he was one of the chief men under Archelaus. Herod wanted to prove that Archelaus was hostile to him, so he had Alexander brought in while still in chains and questioned him again about their planned flight. He asked whether they had decided to go away, and how they intended to do it. We meant to go to Archelaus, who had promised to send us on to Rome. But we had no wicked or harmful plans against our father, and none of the charges our enemies have made against us are true. I only wish he had questioned Tyrannus and Jucundus more strictly. They were killed suddenly through Antipater's doing, after he placed his own friends among the crowd for that purpose. After this, Herod ordered both Alexander and Melas to be taken to Glaphyra, the daughter of Archelaus. He commanded that she be asked whether she knew anything about Alexander's treacherous plans against Herod. As soon as they came to her, and she saw Alexander in chains, she struck her head, and in great terror, let out a deep and moving groan. The young men also began to weep. The sight was so pitiful to everyone present that for a long time they could neither speak nor act. At last Ptolemy, who had been ordered to bring Alexander, told him to say whether his wife knew about what he had done. How could she not know what I do, when I love her more than my own soul, and when I have had children by her? At this Glaphyra cried out that she knew of no wicked design of his. Still, if falsely accusing herself would help save him, she said she would confess everything. There is no such wickedness as those who least ought to suspect us imagine, either that I have planned or that you know of. There is only this: we had decided to withdraw to Archelaus, and from there to Rome. Glaphyra admitted the same thing. Herod then thought Archelaus's hostility toward him had been fully proved. He sent a letter by Olympus and Volumnius, ordering them, as they sailed, to stop at Eleusa in Cilicia and deliver the letter to Archelaus. They were to confront him with the accusation that he had taken part in his son's treacherous plan against him. From there they were to sail to Rome. If they found that Nicolaus had made any progress, and that Caesar was no longer angry with Herod, they were to give Caesar Herod's letters and the proofs he had prepared against the young men. Archelaus defended himself by saying that he had promised to receive the young men, because it was to their advantage, and to their father's advantage, so that no overly harsh action would be taken while everyone was caught up in anger and confusion, because of the present suspicions. But he said he had not promised to send them to Caesar, nor had he promised the young men anything else that could show hostility toward Herod. When these ambassadors reached Rome, they found a suitable opportunity to deliver their letters to Caesar, because Caesar had already been reconciled to Herod. The circumstances of Nicolaus's embassy were as follows. As soon as Nicolaus came to Rome and arrived at court, he did not begin only with the business for which he had been sent. He also decided to accuse Sylleus. Even before Nicolaus spoke with the Arabians, they were already quarreling among themselves. Some of them abandoned Sylleus's side and joined Nicolaus, telling him about all the wicked things that had been done and giving him clear proof that Sylleus had killed many of Obotus's friends. When these men left Sylleus, they had taken with them letters that could convict him. Nicolaus saw the opportunity and used it so that he could later accomplish his own purpose. He immediately tried to bring about a reconciliation between Caesar and Herod. He was fully convinced that if he directly asked to defend Herod, he would not be allowed to do so. But if he asked to accuse Sylleus, an occasion would arise for him to speak on Herod's behalf. So when the case was ready to be heard, and the day had been appointed, Nicolaus accused Sylleus in the presence of Berytus's ambassadors. He said he charged Sylleus with causing the death of the king of Berytus and of many other Arabians. He said Sylleus had borrowed money for no honest purpose, and he proved that Sylleus had committed adultery, not only with Arabian women, but with Roman women as well. He added that, worst of all, Sylleus had turned Caesar against Herod, and that everything Sylleus had said about Herod's actions was false. When Nicolaus reached the subject, Caesar stopped him and told him to speak only about Herod's affair. He ordered Nicolaus to show that Herod had not led an army into Arabia, had not killed 2,500 men there, had not taken prisoners, and had not plundered the country. I will show above all that either none of the charges you have been told are true, or only a very small part of them is true. If they had been true, you would have had good reason to be even more angry with Herod. There was a debt of 500 talents owed to Herod, and there was a bond stating that if the appointed time passed, he was allowed to make a seizure from any part of the debtor's country. As for the so-called army, it was not an army, but a party sent out to demand the rightful payment of the money. This party was not sent at once, nor as soon as the bond allowed. Sylleus had often appeared before Saturninus and Volumnius, the presidents of Syria, and at last at Berytus he swore by your fortune that he would certainly pay the money within 30 days and hand over the fugitives who were under his authority. But when Sylleus did none of this, Herod again appeared before the presidents. After they gave him permission to make a seizure for his money, he went out of his own country with difficulty, taking a party of soldiers for that purpose. This is the whole war that these men describe so tragically. This is the whole matter of the expedition into Arabia. How can this be called a war, when your own presidents permitted it, the agreements allowed it, and it was not carried out until your name, O Caesar, as well as the names of the other gods, had been profaned? Now I must speak in order about the captives. There were robbers living in Trachonitis. First there were no more than 40 of them, but later their number increased, and they escaped the punishment Herod would have inflicted on them by making Arabia their refuge. Sylleus received them, supplied them with food so they could harm all mankind, gave them land to live in, and took for himself the profit they made from robbery. Yet he promised to hand these men over, under the same oaths, and within the same time that he swore to pay his debt. He cannot possibly show that anyone else has been taken out of Arabia at this time besides these men, and not even all of these, but only those who could not hide themselves. So the accusation about captives, which has been presented in such a hateful way, proves to be nothing more than a fiction, and a lie made to stir up your anger. I even dare to say that when the forces of the Arabians attacked us, and 1 or 2 of Herod's men fell, Herod merely defended himself. Then Nasbus, their general, fell, along with about 20, 5 others in all, and no more. Sylleus has multiplied each single soldier by 100, and so counts the dead as 2,500. This angered Caesar more than ever. He turned to Sylleus in a rage and asked him how many Arabians had been killed. Sylleus then faltered and admitted that he had been deceived. The agreements about the money he had borrowed were also read aloud, along with the letters from the governors of Syria and the complaints from all the cities that had been harmed by the robbers. The result was that Sylleus was condemned to die. Caesar was reconciled to Herod and accepted that Herod had reason to regret the harsh things Caesar had written to him, since those letters had been caused by slander. Caesar even told Sylleus that, by giving him a false account of events, Sylleus had forced him to behave ungratefully toward a man who was his friend. In the end, the matter came to this: Sylleus was sent away to answer Herod's case against him, to repay the debt he owed, and afterward to suffer death as his punishment. Still, Caesar remained offended with Berytus because Berytus had taken the government upon himself without first obtaining Caesar's consent. Caesar had intended to give Arabia to Herod, but the letters Herod had sent prevented him from doing so. Olympus and Volumnius saw that Caesar had now become favorable to Herod, so they thought it best to deliver at once the letters Herod had ordered them to give Caesar concerning his sons. After Caesar read them, he decided it would not be proper to add another government to Herod, since Herod was now old and in a troubled condition because of his sons. So Caesar received the ambassadors of Berytus. After briefly reproving Berytus for his rashness in not waiting until he received the kingdom from Caesar, he accepted his gifts and confirmed him in his government. Caesar was now reconciled to Herod, and wrote to him that he was sorry for him because of his sons. If they had been guilty of impious and insolent crimes against him, Herod ought to punish them as men who had plotted against their father, and Caesar gave him authority to do so. But if they had only planned to run away, Caesar wanted him to warn them and not go to the utmost severity. He also advised Herod to call an assembly, choose some place near Berytus, a city belonging to the Romans, and bring together the governors of Syria, Archelaus king of Cappadocia, and as many other men as he thought distinguished by their friendship toward him and by their rank. With their approval, he was to decide what should be done. These were Caesar's instructions. When the letter reached him, Herod was immediately very glad, both because Caesar had been reconciled to him, and because he had been given full authority over his sons. Yet the result was strange. Earlier, when he was in trouble, though he had shown severity, he had not been so rash or hasty in bringing about his son's destruction. Now, in his prosperity, he used this favorable change and his new liberty to act out his hatred against them in an unheard of way. He therefore summoned to this assembly as many people as he thought proper, but he left out Archelaus. Either he hated Archelaus and so would not invite him, or he thought Archelaus would stand in the way of his plans. When the governors and the other men connected with the cities came to Berytus, Herod kept his sons in a village belonging to Sidon, called Platena, which was near the city. He did this so that, if they were called for, he could produce them, though he did not think it suitable to bring them before the assembly. When 150 assessors were present, Herod came by himself and accused his sons. He did this in a way that did not seem like a sorrowful accusation made only from necessity and because of the misfortunes he was suffering. Instead, it was very indecent for a father accusing his own sons. He was extremely violent and uncontrolled when he tried to prove the charge against them, and he showed the strongest signs of passion and cruelty. He would not allow the assessors to weigh the evidence, but declared it true on his own authority, in a way most improper for a father speaking against his sons. Herod himself read what the young men had written. In it there was no confession of any plots or schemes against him, but only an account of how they had planned to run away, together with certain reproaches against him because of the ill will he bore them. When he came to those reproaches, he cried out more than ever and exaggerated their words as though they had confessed a design against him. He swore that he would rather lose his life than hear such insulting language. At last he said that he had sufficient authority, both by nature and by Caesar's grant, to do what he thought fit. He also cited a law of their country which required that, if parents laid their hands on the head of the accused, those who stood by were obliged to stone him to death. Herod said that, though he was ready to do this in his own country and kingdom, he was still waiting for their decision. Yet he said they had come there not so much as judges to condemn his sons for such obvious designs against him, by which he had almost perished through them, but as men who had an opportunity to show their hatred of such practices and to declare how unworthy it would be for anyone, even someone very remote from the case, to let such treacherous designs pass unpunished. When the king had said this, and the young men had not been brought in to defend themselves, the assessors saw that there was no place left for fairness or reconciliation, so they confirmed Herod's authority. First, Saturninus, a man who had been consul and was of great dignity, gave his judgment, though with much moderation and distress. He said he condemned Herod's sons, but did not think they should be put to death. He had sons of his own, and killing one's son was a greater misfortune than anything a son could bring upon him. After him, the sons of Saturninus, 3 sons who followed him and served as his legates, gave the same judgment as their father. Volumnius, however, gave the opposite sentence, saying that death should be inflicted on men who had been so impiously undutiful to their father. Most of the rest said the same, so the conclusion seemed to be that the young men were condemned to die. Immediately after this, Herod left that place and took his sons to Tyre. There Nicolaus met him while returning by sea from Rome. After Herod had told him what had happened at Berytus, he asked what Nicolaus thought about his sons, and what his friends at Rome thought of the matter. What they had determined to do against thee was impious, and thou oughtest to keep them in prison. If thou thinkest anything further necessary, thou mayst indeed punish them, but in such a way that thou mayst not seem to give way to anger more than to govern thyself by judgment. But if thou inclinest to the milder course, thou mayst release them, lest perhaps thy misfortunes be made incurable. This is also the opinion of the greater part of thy friends at Rome. At this Herod was silent and very thoughtful, and he ordered Nicolaus to sail along with him. When they came to Caesarea, everyone there was talking about Herod's sons. The whole kingdom was in suspense, and the people were filled with expectation about what would happen to them. A terrible fear seized everyone that the old disorders of the family would come to a sorrowful end, and the people were deeply troubled by the sufferings of the young men. It was dangerous to say anything rash about the matter, and even dangerous to hear someone else speak about it. People's pity had to be shut up inside them, which made the excess of their grief very painful, though it remained very silent. There was, however, an old soldier of Herod's named Tiro, who had a son of the same age as Alexander, and who was Alexander's friend. Tiro was so outspoken that he openly said what others only thought in silence. He was often driven to cry out among the crowd, speaking in the most unguarded way, that truth had perished and justice had been taken away from men, while lies and ill will prevailed and cast such a fog over public affairs that those doing wrong could not see the greatest evils that can befall human beings. Because he was so bold, he did not seem to have kept himself out of danger by speaking so freely. Yet the reasonableness of what he said made people regard him as having acted with great courage and at the proper time. For that reason everyone listened to him with pleasure. Though they first looked to their own safety by keeping silent, they still welcomed his great freedom of speech, for the expectation of so great a calamity compelled them to say whatever they pleased about Tiro. The man had forced his way into the king's presence with great freedom, and asked to speak with him alone. The king allowed it, and then he spoke as follows. My king, since I cannot endure the weight of the trouble I am under, I have chosen to take this bold liberty, even at the risk of my own safety, because it may benefit you if you are willing to make use of it. Where is your understanding gone, leaving your soul empty? Where is that extraordinary insight by which you have carried out so many great and glorious actions? Why are you now alone, deserted by your friends and relatives? I must conclude that they are neither your friends nor your relatives, since they look on silently at such dreadful wickedness in your once happy kingdom. Do you not see what is happening? Will you kill these 2 young men, born from your queen, who are filled with every virtue to the highest degree, and leave yourself helpless in old age, exposed to one son who has badly handled the hopes you placed in him, and to relatives whose deaths you yourself have often resolved upon? Do you not notice that the silence of the people both recognizes the crime and detests the deed? The whole army and its officers pity these poor unhappy young men, and hate those who are carrying this matter out. The king listened to these words calmly for a while. But what can be said? When Tiro openly touched on the bad conduct and treachery of Herod's household, the king was stirred up. Tiro then went further, gradually using the uncontrolled freedom of speech common to a soldier, and he was not disciplined enough to suit his words to the moment. Herod became deeply disturbed. He seemed to feel that he was being reproached rather than advised for his own good, especially as he learned from Tiro that the soldiers hated what he was about to do, and that the officers were indignant at it. So he ordered that all those whom Tiro had named, together with Tiro himself, should be bound and kept in prison. After this, Trypho, the king's barber, seized the opportunity and came to tell the king that Tiro had often tried to persuade him, while he was trimming the king with a razor, to cut the king's throat. Tiro, he said, had promised that by doing this Trypho would become one of Alexander's chief friends, and would receive great rewards from him. When Trypho had said this, the king ordered Tiro, Tiro's son, and the barber to be tortured, and this was done. Tiro himself held firm, but his son saw his father already in a miserable condition, had no hope of deliverance, and understood what would come from these terrible sufferings. He therefore said that if the king would free him and his father from torture in return for what he was about to say, he would tell the truth. When the king gave his word that he would do so, Tiro's son said that an agreement had been made for Tiro to lay violent hands on the king, because Tiro could easily approach him when he was alone. If Tiro suffered death afterward, as was likely, the deed would be a generous act done for Alexander's sake. This is what Tiro's son said, and by it he freed his father from the distress he was in. Yet it remains uncertain whether he had been forced by torture to speak the truth, or whether he invented the story in order to obtain deliverance from misery for himself and his father. As for Herod, if he had previously had any doubt about killing his sons, there was now no room left for doubt in his mind. He had driven away everything that might have given him even the smallest reason to think better of the matter, and he now hurried to bring his purpose to its end. He brought out 300 of the officers who were under accusation, along with Tiro, Tiro's son, and the barber who had accused them, and placed them before an assembly. Yet he brought an accusation against them all. The crowd stoned them with whatever came to hand and killed them. Alexander and Aristobulus were also brought to Sebaste by their father's command, and there they were strangled. During the night their bodies were carried to Alexandrium, where their uncle on their mother's side and most of their ancestors had been buried. Perhaps some may now think it not unreasonable that such deeply rooted hatred could grow so much on both sides, that it went further and overcame natural affection. Yet it deserves careful thought whether the blame should be laid on the young men, because they gave such an occasion for their father's anger, led him into what he did, and by continuing so long in the same course made matters impossible to repair and brought him to treat them so mercilessly. Or perhaps the blame should be laid on the father, because he was so hard-hearted and so deeply attached to rule and to everything that served his own glory that he would admit no partner with him, so that whatever he himself wished to do would remain unchangeable. Or perhaps fortune has greater power than all prudent reasoning. From this belief we are persuaded that human actions are determined beforehand by an unavoidable necessity, and we call her fate, because nothing is done apart from her. I suppose it will be enough to compare this idea with the other, which gives some power to ourselves and does not make men unaccountable for the different courses of their lives. That latter idea is the philosophical judgment of our ancient law. Accordingly, concerning two of the causes of this sad event, anyone may blame the young men. They acted out of youthful vanity and pride in their royal birth. They could not bear to hear accusations made against their father, and they certainly were not fair judges of the actions of his life. They were ill-natured in their suspicions and uncontrolled in their speech, and for both reasons they were easily caught by those who watched them and reported them in order to gain favor. Yet their father cannot be thought excusable for the dreadful impiety he committed against them. Without any certain evidence that they had treacherous designs against him, and without proof that they had made preparations for such an attempt, he dared to kill his own sons. They were handsome in body, greatly loved by others, and lacking in no part of good conduct, whether in hunting, military exercises, or speaking when occasions for discourse arose. In all these things they were skillful, especially Alexander, the elder of the two. Surely, even if Herod had condemned them, it would have been enough to keep them alive in chains, or to let them live in exile far from his dominions. He was surrounded by Roman forces, which were a strong protection for him, and their help would have prevented him from suffering anything through a sudden attack or open force. But to kill them suddenly in order to satisfy the passion that ruled him showed unbearable impiety. He was also guilty of so great a crime in his old age. Nor can the delays he made, or the long time over which the matter unfolded, excuse him at all. When a man is suddenly astonished and disturbed in mind, and then commits a wicked action, it is indeed a grave crime, but it is something that often happens. But to do it after deliberation, after repeated attempts and repeated postponements, and at last to undertake and complete it, was the act of a murderous mind, one not easily turned away from evil. He showed the same temper afterward in what he did, when he did not spare those who seemed to be the best loved of the friends he still had. In that case, though the justice of the punishment made those who died less pitied, the man's cruelty was just as great, because he did not refrain from killing them also. But we shall have occasion to speak about those persons later. Although Herod met Augustus at Aquileia, the accusation against his sons was postponed until they reached Rome, as section 3 confirms, and as we are told more fully in the Jewish War, Book I, chapter 23, section 3. What Josephus says there properly belonged to Alexander, the elder brother, namely that he was brought to Rome. Here it is rightly extended to both brothers, not only in our copies but also in Zanaris's copy. There is no reason to doubt that both brothers were present at this formal hearing before Augustus, even though Alexander alone made the defense, since he was the elder brother and was a very capable speaker. Some prejudiced men have indulged the wild suspicion, as we have already noted in Antiquities, Book Roman 15, chapter 11, section 7, that Josephus's account of Herod rebuilding the temple is nothing more than a fable. It may therefore be useful to notice this incidental statement in Alexander's speech before his father Herod, in defense of himself and his brother. He refers to the temple as something everyone knew had been built by Herod. See John 2:20. See also another speech of Herod himself to the young men who pulled down his golden eagle from the front of the temple. There he mentions that building the temple had cost him an immense sum, and that the Assamanians, during the 125 years in which they held the government, had not been able to accomplish so great a work in honor of God. This appears in Antiquities, Book Roman 17, chapter 6, section 3. Dr. Hudson here gives Suetonius's words about this Nicopolis when Augustus rebuilt it. So that the memory of the victory at Actium might be celebrated more fully afterward, he built Nicopolis at Actium, and ordered public shows to be held there every 5th year. Augustus here calls Julius Caesar his father, although by birth Julius Caesar was only his uncle, because Augustus had been adopted by him. See the same Antiquities, Book Roman 14, chapter 14, section 4. This is also authentic evidence that, in the days of Augustus, the Jews began preparing for the celebration of the Sabbath at the 9th hour on Friday, as the tradition of the elders then apparently required them to do. The remaining part of this chapter is remarkable because it rightly distinguishes natural justice, religion, and morality from positive institutions in every country, and clearly gives preference to the former over the latter. The true prophets of God always did the same under the Old Testament, as did Christ in his New Testament. From this, Josephus seems at this time to have been closer to Christianity than the scribes and Pharisees of his age were, for we know from the New Testament that their opinion and practice were entirely different. It is worth observing here how careful Josephus was in discovering the truth in Herod's history. He would not follow even Nicholas of Damascus, though Nicholas was so great a historian, when there was strong reason to suspect that he was flattering Herod. Josephus solemnly professes this impartiality in history here, and he has given more demonstrations of that impartiality than almost any historian at all. As for Herod's taking great wealth out of David's sepulchre, although I cannot prove it, I strongly suspect it from this very history. The joint presidents of Syria, Saturninus and Volumnius, were perhaps not equal in authority. Rather, the latter may have been like a procurator under the former as the very learned Norris and Poggi, and with them Dr. Hudson determined. Berytus had by now become such an established name for the kings of Arabia, Petra, and Damascus, that when the crown came to Licinius, he changed his name to Berytus, as Haverkamp rightly observes here. See Antiquities, Book Roman 13, chapter 15, section 2. The oath by the fortune of Caesar was later put to Polycarp, a bishop of Smyrna, by the Roman governor, to test whether he was a Christian, since those who refused to swear that oath were then regarded as Christians. See the martyrdom of Polycarp, section 9. What Josephus reports Augustus as saying here, that Berytus was a city belonging to the Romans, is confirmed by Spanheim's notes. Spanheim says that it was a colony established there by Augustus. From this comes Ulpian's statement in De Sensibus, Book Roman 15, that the colony of Berytus was made famous by Caesar's benefits. For the same reason, among the coins of Augustus, we find some with this inscription, the happy colony of Augustus at Berytus. The reader should note that this 8th section is entirely missing from the Old Latin version, as Spanheim truly observes. I suppose there is no other reason for this than the great difficulty of translating it exactly.
And their book 16 ends, in the worst thing Herod ever did, the strangling of his own 2 sons, the grandsons of kings and priests, on the word of a jealous sister and a patient, waiting elder brother. He has spent the whole book winning the friendship of Caesar, securing the rights of his people, raising cities and feeding the poor, and rebuilding the very temple of God, and he ends it a childless murderer in his own hole, having killed the last that remained to him of the wife he loved. This is the paradox. Josephus will not let us set down the great king and the ruined man are one and the same. And the coldest irony of all still waits in the books to come, for the son who profited most by these deaths, Antipater, will not enjoy them long, and over Bethlehem, in Herod's last years, a certain star is already rising. Thank you for sitting with the whole of Book 16. Mind the footnotes, and beware the folly. One last thing before you go. There is a part on our stage still wanting a voice, and it may as well be yours. Come and read for us at footnotesandfolly.click, and be in the next telling rather than only watching it. And before the lamp goes out, a small request. If something tonight taught you, or surprised you, or simply delighted you, do leave a comment and tell me what it was. And if there's a work, an author, or a tale you should like me to take up next, set it down there as well. I read every one, and many an episode has begun its life as a viewer's suggestion. Until next time.